The war in Ukraine gives us a chance to see if a weapon really lives up to its claims. What the parties hoped for has failed. What was considered unpromising has suddenly become useful. For example, the Kinjal is claimed by Russian propaganda to be one of Russia's top hypersonic missiles that cannot be intercepted by any air defense system. But it seems that Kinjal is the biggest scam that has misled both the Pentagon and Chinese generals. And now you will understand why. The price of one missile is staggering, about 10 million. This is 5 times more expensive than the American Tomahawk and 2.5 times more expensive than Patriot missiles. And what about efficiency? You're about to fall out of your chair. Still, it turns out that the Kinjal superfast missile is not actually a hypersonic missile. The fact is that a speed figure of more than Mach 5 or more than 3,800 miles per hour is only the fundamental difference between hypersonic rockets and others. If we consider only speed, then the definition of a hypersonic missile also includes ballistic missiles that have been around for decades. For example, all intercontinental ballistic missiles are hypersonic, reaching about 15,000 miles per hour, or about 4 miles per second at top speed. That's how they fly. Now watch how the Kinjal flies. The only difference is that the missile is launched at high altitude from a MiG-31K fighter jet. Still, it flies on a specific ballistic trajectory. Please note that Kinjal does not maneuver. Therefore, literally speaking, this missile does not represent any innovation. Kinjal is a complete deception. After all, its maneuvering and the ability to attack targets on the ground from unexpected vectors make a hypersonic missile virtually invulnerable to air defense. By the way, Chinese hypersonic missiles 2PZD-21 fly the same way. It seems that Xi and Putin have a common problem. Are you up yet? Don't rush to sit down. So here's one more fact, the last nail in the coffin called Kinjal. Attention! As Kinjal approaches the target, its speed drops. Below hypersonic speed, why does everyone call Kinjal a hypersonic missile? At the very moment when Kinjal goes from hypersonic to supersonic speed, the missile becomes vulnerable to Patriot air defense. Should I say how upset Chinese generals were when they learned that Patriot was intercepting Kinjal? After all, similar air defense systems are deployed in Taiwan. At the same time, American generals rejoiced, but for a slightly different reason. And the fact is that before the war in Ukraine, it was believed that the American Patriot was not capable of guaranteeing interception of hypersonic ballistic missiles. The Patriot was developed in the 1980s primarily to intercept airplanes. But the Department of Defense immediately began to make efforts to improve Patriot's capabilities against ballistic missiles. Successive upgrades to the Patriot Advanced Capability Missile and the system's radar led to improvements in the required performance. However, after the Persian Gulf War, analysts began to question the effectiveness of Patriot. A 1992 investigation by the General Accounting Office found that only 9% of Patriot missile launches had solid evidence of destroying Iraq's SS-1C Scud-B. Although the Patriots destroyed 14 out of 14 Iraqi tactical ballistic missiles during Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2003, the chill of distrust in the US system remained. The chill was reinforced when Saudi Arabia's Patriot air defense system reportedly failed to intercept a volley of missiles aimed at Riyadh on March 25, 2018. This weapon system is nothing but a continuous series of disasters, said Theodore Postel, and a well-known critic of US missile defense. But the war in Ukraine has been a tough challenge and has rehabilitated the American Patriot, and the Russian Kinjal failed. So it goes. However, not everything the Russians do is a scam. For example, Putin has weapons against which there is no counteraction, neither in Ukraine nor among his allies. These are terrible, heavy, blunt, high explosive bombs, FAB-250, FAB-500, FAB-1500, and FAB-3000. The number in the marking indicates the weight of the bomb in kilograms, which in pounds means 550, 1100, 3300, and 6600 respectively. The warhead makes up approximately 45% of the total weight. Wow, look, they just bolt a module with wings and a stabilizer to the huge bombs, put in navigation and a control board. In fact, it's an analog of the American JDAM ER, but they do it right on the airfields. And it works! The range of these planning aerial bombs depends on the speed and altitude of the aircraft at the time of release. For example, at the subsonic speed of the carrier at an altitude of 46,000 feet, the bomb can cover a distance of up to 30 miles. This is not always enough to hit the warehouses and logistics of the Ukrainian army, but this range is always sufficient to hit Ukrainian positions without entering the range of Ukrainian air defense. The lack of accuracy of Russian bombs is compensated for by the number of drops. After such bombardments, only ruins and a mess of earth and debris remain. Can't something be done about it? The only way to combat Russia's planning bombs is to threaten the carriers from the ground or air. But to do so, the Ukrainian army needs to have more modern air defense systems and a numerical advantage in fighter jets that can push Russian aircraft away from the front line. Give it a thumbs up if you also think the US Patriot and F-16 would handle this better than anything else. So far, the Russians have an unexpected advantage with these bombs. The FABs with wings also compensate for the inaccuracy of Russian conventional artillery because one 110-pound bomb is 12 152mm shells. But most importantly, they help the Russian army bring its frontline aviation back into the game, which had been circling idle tens of miles from the front line. The fact is that the Russians failed to capture the sky, which is another unexpected failure of this war. To recap, most independent observers predicted that the Russian Air Force would quickly become the master of the sky. After all, the best Russian planes can see and shoot further than Ukrainian ones. Indeed, within 48 hours after the invasion, Russian official sources claimed the complete destruction of Ukrainian air defense and aviation. However, this turned out not to be the case. What happened? The Ukrainians managed to preserve their maneuverable air defense after the first missile strikes, and then even the not-so-modern Soviet air defense systems that were in service in Ukraine were able to threaten Russian aircraft because even Russia's best Su-35 fighters are not stealthy. Well, okay, the Russian General Staff probably thought, let's wait until they run out of missiles. But then an absolutely incredible phenomenon in military history happened. Frankensam, you will laugh, but Frankensam means Frankenstein plus surface-to-air missile system. Roughly speaking, Ukrainians taught Soviet air defense to shoot American missiles. For example, the Soviet-built Ukrainian Buk anti-aircraft missile system can now use RIM-7 missiles. This is not the only Frankensam model that has been developed. It's incredible. The concept has been so successful that American lawmakers are proposing that the US Air Force consider adopting Frankensam to defend its air bases. They propose to spend $25 billion on this over and above the previous budget constraints. But while the Russian frontline aviation suffered an unexpected disaster, as at least 127 Russian aircraft were destroyed or damaged by the end of August 2024, the tanks suffered a real catastrophe. They have failed. Independent researchers at Oryx say that from the beginning of the war to the end of August 2024, Russia lost at least 3336 tanks and 1522 armored fighting vehicles. What the hell happened? We all saw columns of Russian vehicles on Ukrainian roads in the first days of the invasion. This is exactly what the Soviet invasion of Western Europe would have looked like if the USSR had retained its influence and power. An avalanche of 40,000 tanks was supposed to reach the French border and the English Channel on the 13th day of the invasion. But the Ukrainian events took a different turn. Russian tanks and armored vehicles were caught in the hell that Ukrainian defenders had arranged for them. First of all, Ukrainian artillery. At the beginning of the full-scale Russian invasion, Ukraine had the most significant artillery force in Europe after Russia. 1,176 guns and howitzers, plus up to 400 MLRS. According to official figures, up to 80% of the losses of Russian armored vehicles in the first phase of the war were caused by artillery. The remaining 20% were caused by units armed with ATGMs. The longest range ATGM in the Ukrainian arsenal is the Ukrainian-developed Stugna P system. Its export version is known as Skiff. The range reaches 16,500 feet. Lightweight ATGMs provided to Ukraine by Western allies have become effective at short range. Tens of thousands of Panzerfaust, NLAW, and Javelin, capable of penetrating up to 600-700 millimeters of homogeneous armor, performed very well at the first stage. Even the territorial defense fighters and units of the National Police of Ukraine had these weapons, which gave nightmares to the tails of Russian columns. It was a nightmare. But none of this would have been possible without tactical intelligence. The Ukrainians were quicker and more precise in adjusting fire, and far more efficient in coordinating between units. Therefore, it was suicide for Russian tanks to stand still. The necessary data and coordinates came from reconnaissance UAVs. Drones became the jokers of this war. Bayraktar TB2 drones played a key role at the beginning of the invasion, and Sea Baby and Magura V5 maritime drones effectively zeroed in on the Russian Black Sea Fleet. By the way, this is another major failure of Russia in this war. You can see how it happened in our special video. Now, the Ukrainian battlefield is a supermarket of UAVs. Reconnaissance drones come in all shapes and sizes. The most popular is the Chinese DJI Mavic quadcopter. Its cost can range from $1,500 to $3,000 per unit. Reconnaissance UAV units detect enemy objects, troops, vehicles, or artillery, and quickly transmit the coordinates to their commanders. Up to 100 drones can hover over a limited frontline area constantly. They make the battlefield transparent. Such warfare resembles the game rock, paper, scissors, but when all players know the actions of their opponents in advance. Further away from the front line, larger, often winged UAVs equipped with cameras costing thousands of dollars are involved. These drones can fly and see much further. When targets are detected, their coordinates are entered into the Kropiva system. This is a digital map updated from various sources in real time. Then the targets are hit by a particular unit. However, drones not only conduct reconnaissance, but also kill. A small, inexpensive FPV drone with explosives has turned out to be one of the most powerful weapons on the front line. FPVs were designed for civilian racers. The total cost of components of such a drone, including the warhead, can be only $5,000 or less. FPVs are more accurate than artillery. They can follow and ram vehicles on their move. They can either hit the target or drop munition on it. When hitting the target at high speed, a hot blast of liquid metal flies out of it and pierces the armor of the vehicle. Raising the use of UAVs in the war made heavy machines, for example tanks, move several kilometers further from the front line. Meanwhile, infantrymen describe FPVs and drones that drop munitions as their biggest threat. They say there are so many now that it's hard to move between trenches or reinforced dugouts. UAVs are used not only on a battlefield. Both Russia and Ukraine hit targets hundreds of kilometers away from the front line using long-range UAVs. These means often attack the plants and factories that produce the armaments, military bases, or objects of energetic infrastructure deep inside the enemy's territory. Russia actively uses Iran's UAVs Shahed on the targets in Ukraine. Shahed goes on the route programmed in advance. This route often has as many turns as possible to confuse and exhaust Ukrainian air defense. Ukraine applies aircraft-type drones to attack Russian oil and gas industry objects 450 miles from the border. And recently, Ukraine presented UAV Palyanitsia. Experts call this device a rocket drone or jet drone. Palyanitsia perhaps will become a new page in this war, bringing new ways of using drones to light. Will Palyanitsia be the weapon of victory? Share your thoughts in the comments.